Oh, if we could just see what is right in front of us. On each page of the Book of Mormon, the indicators show us that the text is authentic. And truly, the Spirit of God hovers over the pages. We spoke before about the introduction which Joseph Smith wrote. As we turn the page from the introduction to the ancient record itself, we suddenly enter a different world. If you study the scriptures enough, you can feel the change in the texture. It has a very unique flavor. It has a completely different composition. It looks different, it sounds different, it feels different. I'll try to explain this in a different way. Before I could attain my doctoral degree, I had to have a master's degree. I had graduated from a Protestant college, and for the master's, I attended a fine Catholic university. My favorite mentor was a blind priest who was tough but had a great mind. One day I received a call from my committee chairman, Dr. Pereira. Dr. Pereira told me that the committee had discovered my problem, and I didn't even know I had one. The chairman asked me if I'd studied the King James Bible all my life. I said yes, and the chairman said the problem was I thought in King James English. That was the problem we had to work on, but I never repented. The point is that language structure and syntax and speech patterns are varied between different people. At a first glance, the reader may not notice the transition of speech from Joseph Smith to the speech of the ancient Hebrews. Some of us have read it many, many times before we begin to notice and understand the shift. By shift, it isn't a change in setting or events, but in the language. There are repetitions or patterns or rhythms you can feel. We have touched before on the use of the word and. When you turn that page from the introduction into the ancient text, the frequency of and suddenly doubles, or nearly doubles. And it stays that way for 531 pages. Modern English uses and much less often, in the range of 3 to 4%. But the frequency and in the Book of Mormon abruptly changes to about 6%. This is one of the identifying characteristics of the ancient record. I remember as a boy how we tried to tear apart the walls that the prisoners had built for the military barracks. They had used 6 nails on each board, when Americans usually used 3 nails. And we were stymied. We could not get the boards apart. And I tried to figure, as a child, out why the prisoners did that. Maybe they were trying to get back at us as an enemy. Maybe they were trying to use up the metal and the nails. Maybe they were lazy. That wasn't true. Finally, I thought they didn't know the difference, simply because they weren't carpenters. In the same way, for so many years I've wondered why the Nephites used so many ands, those connectors. Finally, I came to understand there was a complete difference between the language structure and ours. And here's the core of it. There was no word for and in Hebrew. Instead, the meaning of and was simply conveyed by one letter of the alphabet. That letter was added as a prefix to the following word to connect 2 phrases or thoughts together. And was used somewhat like our comma. As a single letter, it sounded like an accent sound to the first syllable of the next phrase. The Hebrew letter was vav, is pronounced va. It isn't a dominant, independent phrase like and. Notice the hard and almost harsh sound of and. Instead, the letter vav adds a soft va sound to the word to which it's attached. Now, in addition, it's believed that in earlier times, the vav sounded more like a wa. But and as a separate word would never be slight. We hate redundant sounds. They can be unpleasant. So in different time periods, a hard va may have been spoken, and in another time, it might be a very soft va or wa. And that in itself may have altered the number of times that sound was repeated. A key understanding is that the sound and frequency of vav or wa changed through the century. And the bottom line is that there's a difference in the frequency of this conjunction from early Hebrew to modern English. And the difference can be identified. The word and appears 16,321 times in the Book of Mormon. That's about 6% of the whole text. On the average, nearly every 17th word. Remember, like nails on a wall, that specific frequency turns out to be very significant. It's interesting to compare the frequency of and in the Book of Mormon to the frequency of and in other books. I compared it particularly in 100 books published in the century the Book of Mormon was published. The Book of Mormon has a frequency of about 6%. The books with the lowest frequency have about 2% and the books with the highest frequency had about 4% and altogether, the book average was about 3% of the text. That's about half of the ands which are in the Book of Mormon. Over the years, I've noticed that just 4 books, all from one specific time and one specific place, that were translated into English and have the same frequency of and as the Book of Mormon. I believe there are probably others, but I've never found them. Those 4 books were all written close to 600 BC. They were all written in Hebrew, and they were written about the time that Jerusalem was destroyed. They are books of the Bible: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. They were all written before, or at the time, or shortly after the time that Jerusalem was destroyed. And that's when Lehi's family escaped the city and the Book of Mormon started to be written. So the only books I can find that match the Book of Mormon are the Hebrew scriptures from the same time and the same place. Of course, it only makes sense that if the Book of Mormon is a record of people who left Jerusalem at the same time when Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel left, you might expect it would have the same frequency of and. The collective and frequency of those books of the Bible in a literal English translation is 0.059. The Book of Mormon also has a collective frequency of and of 0.059. So the question is this: how could Joseph Smith leave his natural and frequency and happen to come up with and maintain through 269,528 words the correct matching frequency of 0.059? Try that sometime while you're writing. I've tried, but can't do it. There have been over 129 million different books printed since Gutenberg invented the printing press. I wonder how many of them have this matching and frequency. I kind of think this alone also makes the Book of Mormon 1 in a million, if not 1 in 129 million. Oh, if we could just see what is right in front of us. The Book of Mormon is amazing. It's authentic. I know by the Spirit, independent of all these things, it is true.